Hello, hi. Welcome. Come on in the room. Hello, welcome. Good afternoon, everyone. We're excited for today's conversation with the People's Coalition for Safety and Freedom about repealing and replacing the 1994 crime bill. Hey.
Hello, how are you, Tia?
I'm doing all right. How you doing?
I'm great.
Good. How you doing, Timothy?
I'm doing great. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, I hear you just fine. And we're just waiting for
Outstanding.
our
Hey,
host
Tim.
to post.
Hey, how y'all doing today?
Doing pretty good.
I'm loving the glasses they're giving.
I know they are.
Very chic. Very
Thank
chic.
you. You know, big frames are a great replacement for makeup, I found. So
Good to know. Good to know.
in my quest to be a content creator, secretly, my secret quest to be a content creator, I found that wearing some big frames it goes really far. So while folks are coming on in the room, I'm going to introduce myself and beckon our host, my co-founder and co-conspirator, Kendrick, to come to the live along with us. My name is Tia Oz, Executive Director of Build Power. We are a building organization dedicated to helping advance grassroots frontline movement objectives using the power of storytelling. I'm really excited to have our guests today be introduced to you shortly to talk about the really important work that they're doing on actually the 29th anniversary of the 1994 crime bill. And so we'll get into that more in a bit. Let me just go through our participant list and see. Oh, yes, shout out to People's Coalition in the chat. Sure that you are liking, following for more updates, information, and education during this week of action. All right, I think I can get Kendrick on. No. Request to join. I'm going to be very woo-woo about this and say be patient with any technical challenges, because you know it's still Mercury retrograde according to the astrologist. So
That's what they said. Yeah, I was wondering why, some things were not working for me lately. And I was like, oh, you know what it is? Marquisha was in the microwave. That's exactly right. I could not remember what had happened, but that makes sense.
Hilarious. All right. So let's go ahead. Oh. And it's a request. I have not to join. Here we go. Okay, Kendrick, I just sent you an invite. Let's see if it works. Yeah. Yes.
There we go. I was like, what in the last day of work?
I promise.
We just talked about Marquisio being in the microwave. There's a mess out here right now.
Marquisha has thrown a fit today, and
I was looking at my phone like, my phone. What's the point of buying a new iPhone if you're not gonna let me go live?
she's taking it out on me.
Talk about it. Let's talk about it.
Go live with my friend.
So we're back.
We are back. And a whole year later, okay, to come back with the summer school series. Go ahead, Kendrick, and take it over.
Year, yeah.
Form the line for you.
You said what up, what up?
I said we're just getting it warm for you.
Well, thank you. It's now nice and warm. I appreciate y'all. So yeah. You know, we back doing what we do. Last year, we, tapped into the spirit of political activism and education in our Get Free Friday IG Live Freedom Summer School. And we had some powerful conversations about the work and how to end state-sponsored violence, and specifically focused on the work of the 94 crime bill that helped usher in the age of mass incarceration. For the last year, the coalition has been hard at work organizing in communities across the United States, meeting with members of Congress, and drafting legislation to repeal, take it away, repeal it and replace it with something so much more healthy and not abusive and targeting our people, right? What have they been up to? We're about to find out. We're about to talk to the coalition folks right here on this IG Live. I'm joined by advocates Dana and Timothy, who are here to give us an update about the movement to repeal and replace the 1994 crime bill. So please introduce yourselves.
Tim, I'll let you go first.
I appreciate you. You're so gracious. Timothy Hughes, originally from Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Shout out to Baton Rouge and Louisiana
On the other
for all the amazing, incredible work that's happening there. The other LA, yes. But I built power here with the People's Coalition, and also with the Free to Vote Coalition here in Nashville, Tennessee. And grateful to be here on the live with you. As a true fan of Insecure, it's an honor and a privilege to meet you via IG Live. And thank you so much for your work and your activism in helping to raise awareness about this critically important issue.
Thank you more.
Thanks, Tim. So everyone needs to know I love Tim. I think he's great. When I heard that I would be doing this with him, I was thrilled. So thanks for that introduction, Tim. My name is Dana Weeks. I am from Maryland, which is the best kept secret of the United States in terms of states out there. But I now live in DC. So I live in the swirl that everyone is talking about and wants to see change happen. I am the founder and principal of Thrive Architects, which just launched in May. And essentially, it's just a strategy public policy firm where the whole story behind Thrive is I've been doing policy advocacy in law and practicing law for 15 years. And before that, I used to do organizing for voting rights. And I just got really tired of seeing a lot of people or organizations going to the Hill to be seen, but at the expense of people's liberation and trust. And so I started Thrive Architects to really work with organizations, community-based organizations, to do the real work on the ground at the federal level to see meaningful progress and change.
Kendrick, I can't hear you.
That's because mute. There would be, can't blame that one on Mercury. But yeah, I'm sure that's like the most succinct, short version of all of the incredible things that you do. It's been 1 year since we launched the Freedom Summer School. What has the People's Coalition for Safety and Freedom been up to? What they've been doing?
I'll start. We've been doing a lot. A lot. I came on board actually around this time last year, where we started the drafting process for the bill and the bill framework. And that has been a lot of grunt work, a lot of understanding, a lot of consensus building. So what does that look like? We have had 2 major convenings, one in October and one early this spring, with delegates throughout the nation in the 5 states that we've been working with, to really come together and hear. So we've done like surveys, as everyone knows, town hall meetings, and have all these responses from currently incarcerated individuals and formerly incarcerated individuals. And the question is, now how do we turn this into something that we can take to DC? And so in doing that work, we held those 2 convenings to really build consensus. Where are the areas that we want to focus on? And in focusing, and what we've decided on are 5 areas. 5 areas include community investments. They include addressing the school to prison pipeline. They include reimagining safety. So how do we address policing? We include transforming the legal system and also transforming reentry. So those are the 5 areas in which we're focusing on from this, the People's Bill and this bill framework. In addition to having these conversations around consensus building, Fisk University, I just want to give a shout out to Dr. Leslie Collins at Fisk University, has taken all that data so that we could really understand where people want to place emphasis on change. So people have been at the center of this. And then the last thing I'll say before I turn it over to Tim to elaborate, because I know he definitely wants to elaborate on this, is we've also been doing a lot of strategic thinking about how will we approach this on the Hill. And one of the things we focused on was doing monthly policy education about how governing works. How does it work at the federal level? How does it go from a bill introduction to a hearing to a markup to floor consideration, and then doing it all over again? And that's some of the main points, processes for the legislative process. So we've been doing that also every month, so that people can have a real understanding of how the federal government works, but also it can inform their decision-making of how we want to approach the Hill.
Just real quick before you jump in there, what is a legislative process?
Sure, I will talk about that for days. So the legislative process has a few main stages to it.
Or just start with like what that is. What does that mean?
The legislative process is where Congress creates laws. And so for something like repealing and replacing the crime bill, that is not in the jurisdiction of the executive branch, meaning President Biden. That is in the jurisdiction in the hands of Congress. And so what we had to do is then figure out at each stage, where can the coalition play a role? So we had to think about that in terms of who will we work with to get a bill introduced that reflects the coalition's viewpoints. We also had to think about how do we not have the bill just die? And how can it move forward? Because most bills on the Hill do not move forward in the process. And so we thought about how do we work in committees, which that stage is hearings, where a committee can educate itself about the bill and the public about the bill. And then the next phase is a markup, where it is the first time that Congress considers legislation in regular order. It's actually not a floor vote, it's actually in a committee markup. That's the first time that Congress is considering legislation. And then if it is passed out of committee, then it goes to the floor for a floor vote for floor consideration. And that's just in one chamber. So that could be just in the House. And then we have to do it again in the Senate. And you have to do that within 2 years.
Yeah. Which is wild.
Wild.
Let's go, Timothy. What you got?
Yes, and thank you so much for setting that table a little bit for us, because I am not the policy guru person. I'm the people's assembly and connection person, and so I really appreciate so much kind of how that lays out the process, because so much of the process is very intentionally confusing for a lot of folks. And so here in the context in Tennessee, first of all, I want to give appreciation to Don Harrington, who is the executive director for Free Hearts Tennessee. Free Hearts Tennessee works with returning citizens and formerly incarcerated and justice impacted individuals to make sure that this process can be demystified and we consider the voices of those folks most impacted by the policies and the systems that have been essentially used to create second-class citizens within our society. And so I want to give a special appreciation to her for involving me and connecting me to this process, allowing me as a formerly impacted or justice impacted individual to have some say in how this process goes. Because generally what happens if there are folks who have been impacted by the legal system, you don't get to vote, you don't get to have any say in how the government does its work. And so having the ability to be able to plug in with this people's process has really been revolutionary in terms of how it thinks about the ways in which a people's democracy can be assembled, and also about the ways in which we really highlight the voices of those who have been most impacted. So I really appreciate the innovation and the creativity of this moment. And in the Tennessee context specifically, it's so important to remember, y'all, Jim Crow is not history in Tennessee. Jim Crow is alive and well. I tell people all the time that Jim Crow did not change modes. It just changed clothes. It stopped appearing in white suits or white robes and white hats and put on a uniform and went to law school and cut his hair. But it is exactly the same institution as it always was. And here in the state of Tennessee specifically, there are some 470,000 individuals who have been justice impacted, who have lost the right to vote. And just recently, the state Supreme Court in Tennessee made it that much more difficult for individuals who have been justice impacted to even get their voting rights restored, for them to even have a modicum of say in the voting process and in the civic engagement process in that way. And so Don Harrington and several other folks who were involved in the Free to Vote coalition this year that talks a little bit about what happened in the state of Tennessee, but just in general what has happened is that they're increasing.
I don't know if it was just me or did it break up for everybody?
Yeah, just rewind a couple frames back.
Couple frames back.
Yeah.
Short and sweet version. Tennessee is continuing the legacy of Jim Crow by continuing to lock out people from the process of voting. And they continue to do that in part because they're allowed to feel empowered to do so by things like the '94 crime bill, which kind of laid the groundwork for mass incarceration. It should not be lost on anyone on this call and those who are tuned in that Tennessee also is a mass incarceration capital through groups like Core Civic that make billions of dollars locking away Black and brown and poor people in the state of Tennessee and essentially locking them out of the civic engagement process. And so what the Free to Vote Coalition is doing, what those who are working in partnership with us are doing through the People's Coalition for Safety and Freedom is pushing back against those efforts, pushing back against those systems of Jim Crow and white supremacy that continue to keep people locked out of the process and ignorant about its functions. And so it's been my privilege to be a part of this process as a delegate, and I'm looking forward to continuing to utilize People's Assembly's models as a way of innovating and being creative and actually making America as good as it's promised from the standpoint of representative democracy.
Appreciate that. Appreciate that. I mean, I'm sure y'all have had like a real smooth, easy time with this work, right? Because, you know, everybody's really accepting of like, you know, they're like, yes, so let's repeal and replace the crime bill. What are some of those? What does that look like? What is that? Are there challenges there? I don't know.
Absolutely. So some of those challenges look like just reaching the people who have been impacted, right? So we've got a lot of folks who are still in the criminal legal system, who are on supervised release, other folks who are actually in prison, who have been impacted by the '94 crime bill, mass incarceration, and the like. And so reaching the folks who have been impacted has been a real challenge. And so it's taken some real courage for folks who are insiders, folks who are our allies on the outside, to identify those folks who have been impacted by the justice system and the judicial criminal legal system, to make sure that we can amplify their voices. In addition to that, Tennessee, on a number of different levels, is trying to criminalize every action that we take. And so we really out here on some Harriet Tubman type stuff. We're on some making sure we get folks a pathway to freedom through the process of adjudication and through the legislative process and the executive process, but also by making sure that people are under info. So it's been so important for folks to have these summer sessions in the freedom schools as a way to tap into information, because so little about this process, the legislative process and the like, have really been taught in schools. We're at a process right now in some states, especially in Tennessee, where we are banning access to education, banning access to history, banning access to the kinds of information that would allow folks to really be able to understand what this process is. And so overcoming those barriers has been a real challenge.
Yeah, thank you so much. I want to make sure to highlight that y'all are not in the process of tapping in with people who are incarcerated about legislation that has impacted them, but doing the work of helping bring them back into democracy, right? So much of the criminalization and, disenfranchising people is about, like you said, locking them out of the system, locking them out of being able to govern, being able to have a say in how our communities are kept safe, being able to even exercise their full dignity and rights as human beings. And that, for me, is the thing that sticks out the most as we've talked to the different members of the coalition. Shout out to Baji. I'm representing Baji today. I wore my Bill Power shirt to the gym. So much of the impact of the 1994 crime bill, but legislation that and practices and policies that came out of it have been about dehumanizing our people, dehumanizing our community, and not just criminalizing them for, maybe bad actions or mistakes, that people have made when their choices have been limited, but also trying to make it so that they can never participate in society again.
And I'll just add to that point. So Tim touched on it too. Since the 1960s, we've seen a stark decline in civic education. And we're seeing a rise in civic engagement. And what's happening, what I'm noticing, what other people are noticing, is that I have this phrase, people put the emphasis on the wrong syllable, meaning that the emphasis is not on the right syllable. So what happens is people are engaging in a process they don't understand, thinking they do, because there's no education behind it. And so often what I hear, oftentimes for directly impacted communities, is that we want to hear their stories. We want to hear their stories. And I actually had a conversation with Avalon, who's a part of the coalition, about this. And the stories are fine, but what people want to make sure that they're centered on is the understanding. Folks understand how the system works, and their stories are only brought to the floor of Congress, brought to highlight things, but they are not part of the actual policy conversations. And so our job is really to get the voices, but the people engaged at every step of the process possible. And that's a challenge in and of itself, because it's unlearning bad habits or unlearning things that people thought worked and learning new ways of doing things to really make change on the Hill. The other challenge I would say is that passing laws take time. We're at the 30th anniversary of the crime bill. And while we have seen some changes like second chance Pell, et cetera, we haven't really had these major conversations on the Hill the way that we would like to have them. The other thing that's also a challenge is that when we talk about what's interesting about the coalition is there's a strong focus on community investments, meaning we want to focus on education. We want to also focus on housing. We want to focus on healthcare. We want to focus on all those areas. And that requires different areas in Congress we've got to explore, which means there are other bills that the coalition has to be at the table for to create change with that. So while we are looking to repeal and replace the crime bill, we are also looking to address the harms that have followed from the crime bill, which requires us to be at other tables as well, which means we need resources, capacity, and we need a sustainable strategy. The problem with that But, and the last thing I'll say there is that we're also seeing the decline of national organizations investing in this type of work, whether it's through money and also through participation. And so we're at this kind of intersection where next year is going to be the 30th anniversary. We want people engaged in this process, but we're also seeing people pull out from this process in terms of funds and participation. So that's a challenge in and of itself.
So on the 29th anniversary of this crime bill, the 94 crime bill, we are hearing now similar super predator language and similar campaigns and fear mongering around and reframing the fact that people have protested. If you're talking about Stop Cop City and the 61 RICO charges that just dropped on protesters after the police killed Tortuguita in the forest, right? They're the criminals. They're the ones who've committed the crime, but they're trying to criminalize the people who are protesting, right? And you have so many in different cities. You can see this replicated everywhere. The fear mongering to get police budgets up, to get, you know, more police on the street, to arrest more people, right? To put them in prison, when just a couple years ago, the political education reached a peak where people were demanding that we find alternatives and we put that money in investments for the community. Can we talk a little bit about those parallels, right? Like what the time that we're in right now and how urgent and important this is. And I'll give a little caveat here that has nothing to do with y'all. But part of what I've been looking at is this strike that we've been in, right? And a lot of people don't understand that police are not labor, right? These police unions or whatever that are not unions whatsoever, that they put a union name on so that they could be a part of the coalitions like AFL-CIO and some of these folks for the Fraternal Order of the Police, right? And we think that this hot strike summer is, you know, we're being protected by them. But if we block production, historically, if you block production and you block the profit of the shareholders, if you block the profit of the wealthy, who comes to break up the protest? Who comes to break up and protect the bosses? Who does it, right? When you are protesting landlords, who comes to break up the protest and protect the landlords, right? So just want to be real clear, they're not in solidarity with us. And I think that there's a mass understanding right now of what labor is that is better than it has been in the past couple of decades, and that we need to be, you know, in solidarity together. So looking at the time that we're in right now and how people are being fed these lies that, you know, we need police, and watching Rambo cop videos of people jumping on cars and doing all kinds of wild things and still killing us every other day, literally every day, but every other day there's a new video, right? And advocating for bigger budgets so that they could do more harm. So what is unique about this time that makes this work so important?
So I love everything about the framing of that question. I also want to kind of talk a little bit about kind of the historical moment that we're in right now and how we got here. And also, like real talk, the fact that many of the people who brought about the 94 crime bill initially are the ones who are still here. Joe Biden was there in 94 at the crafting of the crime bill and is now president of the United States. We're not talking ancient history. We're talking like younger than hip hop, like literally in this moment right now. So it's critical that we understand, and as we do the analysis, we get that these are the same actors, the same crafters, the same individuals who made this moment happen in 94. They're still adjudicating in legislative power right now. And many of the institutions that are responsible for this collective hand-wringing around police budgets and all of these things are the very same people who benefit from the construction that was created in the 94 crime bill and the maintaining of the status quo as it relates to public safety. So we see in the Tennessee context, in Memphis, Tennessee, the death of Tyree Nichols, now a federal investigation into the officers responsible, which runs against the idea that what we just need is more diversity, equity, inclusion training for law enforcement, more de-escalation training, because we see many of the officers involved and who have now been charged with civil rights violations are melanated people. And so this is not about bad apples. This is not about individuals doing bad things. This is about a system that is corrupt at its core, that began as slave patrols in the beginning and has continued in that process and in that system to the very day. So it's important that we understand that context and that we frame it in that way so that folks understand the systems, the institutions, and the individuals are all interwoven in this, polluted soup that is killing all of us. So it's important that we extricate ourselves and divest our dollars and our resources from a system that is deeply corrupted. The final thing that I'll say as it pertains to what's happening on the local level is that it's so important that people understand this disenfranchisement piece is intentional. Taking away people's voting rights is intentional. 500,000 people pulled out of the voting process and civic engagement is intentional, because in order for you to be able to hold many of these rogue officers and these structures and systems accountable, you got to vote out and adjudicate yourself in the process. You got to be on the jury to make sure that when these individuals are brought before and being held accountable, that you can be a part of that process. But if you are not able to vote, then you can't be selected for jury duty. If you're not able to vote, you can't be on the community oversight board over the law enforcement agency, holding them accountable in their processes and procedures. So it's intentional that they're taking many of the folks who are most impacted by these toxic systems away from any sort of form of reparations or retribution to try to address the issues and concerns that are impacting them. So it's really, really critical that we understand that, and also that we find some measure of connection to the process, which is why the People's Assembly and the People's Coalition and all of the processes by which we're able to be a part of this Free to Vote and People's Coalition for Safety and Freedom are so critical and so important, because it takes away the efforts that have been made to block us from this process and actually intentionally centers and includes us. And that is really what justice looks like.
Danny, you want to add anything?
I'll just add one thing really quickly. What I find interesting about today being the 29th anniversary is that there are communities who don't care. And part of the reason, and there are some people who are trying to learn and better understand what the perspective we're coming from. So I'm actually talking to those folks who are curious, because oftentimes there are two worlds in the United States. And there is a world where some people go through an entire year without being surveilled. If they need mental health services, the police are not involved. If they need health care, the police are not involved. If they want to go outside, if their children are going to school, the police are not involved. They are only involved when they call them to be involved. And so what I think is important is this narrative that's going on. I do think there are changes to the narrative. I'm seeing that happen. But I think what's interesting on the other side is that I think certain communities have got to ask themselves the question of, why is it that I can't understand the other side? And part of that reason is because you're not surveilled 24 hours a day.
Mm-hmm.
And what would your life look like if you were? That is the conversation people are having on the Hill that people tend to ignore when they hear defund or they hear reforms or they hear anything. That is because they are living a very different experience than other people in other communities.
Can you talk?
Yeah.
Oh,
Y'all teaching. Y'all teach.
Come on.
Y'all teach it.
Teach them.
Come on and teach. Okay, Timothy and Dana.
Yes.
I want to make sure that we highlight both of y'all are saying around how deeply systemic this issue is and how deeply kind of the understanding of it is polarized, right? Because the way that it's targeted, right, is very intentional also. And I want to make sure to be encouraged. There's a question that came in through the Q&A about, these are long fights, right? And there's a lot of fatigue. And I think there's also, I wanted to add that to the context of the challenges, right? It's like, we've been in the streets, we've been in the trenches, we've been dealing with this. Okay, my uncle was locked up, now my nephew just got out. Like, how do we deal with both also our fatigue and how do we replenish our energy for the fight? Conversations like this are some of the ways that the power is trying to be, contribute and give folks hope that there are people who are working on it. So I want the person who put that question in the chat to also understand. There was also some commentary in the chat about, like, we don't want to get back out there and march again. People is at brunch and I'm on the street. I hear you. I see you.
I see you. Yes, yes.
Yes.
So I want to highlight that, yes, this conversation is about the context of the crime bill, but we're supporting and partnering with People's Coalition for Safety and Freedom because these are the folks who are also working on the solutions, right? We're working on the solutions every day, and we bring these conversations to highlight that work so that you can be encouraged and so that you can understand other ways also to be involved in the support. Besides, sometimes we do have to get into, okay, and we will, all right? But there are other fronts, right, and other opportunities also to help to reshape, right, for a brighter future. So I just want to make sure to pop in and say that.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of, and we're hosting mental health events and, creating spaces for people to be able to support each other, especially if they're going through similar circumstances, mutual aid programs, making sure that we pool resources to get through this work because it is hard work. Can you talk a little bit about how to get the people involved? We talked about how people don't care or don't know, they don't have the political education, and it's not just that it's declined since the 60s, it's been intentionally targeted, right? Like we've talked about in terms of CRT, and right, it's like they want to make sure we do not know how the process works. So can you talk a little bit about the people's process and how to get people involved?
Absolutely. And I appreciate the framing of it being a people's process discussion because a lot of us really need to understand that we are not, as individuals, as human beings, we're not one issue people. So just because you are justice impacted, it doesn't mean that you don't care about education. It doesn't mean that you don't care about healthcare or housing accessibility.
This helps real quick. Can y'all, anybody who's not talking, there seems to be a little echo on mine. And I wonder if that's for anybody else. So you keep talking, Timothy, and everybody else mute.
Absolutely. Thank you. And so the conversation is that we are not one issue, right? We're not one issue people. We're not one issue impacted. And so it's important that we understand the multiplicity of impacts that are a part of our lives and lived experience, and that we understand that this is not head work or hard work, it's head work and hard work. And so in order for us to really be plugged into this process, we've got to approach it from a multiple different angles. It's about creating ecosystems of thriving. There are lots and lots of ways that we as justice impacted individuals or people of color or communities of color have been impacted by the criminal legal system. And it's going to take as many pathways to get to solutions as it took to get to the problems and the challenges that we face. So it's important that we recognize that we drink our water and mind our business sometimes, that we take, moments of respite, because this work, as was mentioned earlier, is generational work. It doesn't happen one day and off the next.
Pause. Your sound is distorted.
Is it?
Dana,
yeah.
Have you muted?
Dana, please, yeah. Step up.
There we go.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Go back on mute, Dana. Timothy, I think you reshuffled something and it cleared it up a little bit.
Yeah.
Try again.
Right.
Okay, is that better?
Yep.
Yes. Beautiful.
Excellent. Super short version. Whole people living whole lives and we have to have holistic solutions. We've got to make sure that we're talking about food insecurity, because for many people who are poor and disenfranchised, that's what led them into the criminal legal system in the first place. We've got to talk about making sure that schools have wraparound services before and after school care, because that keeps young people who have been interacting with the criminal legal system or with law enforcement in processes that are more positive and more restorative and transformative, rather than leaving them in pathways of incarceration. We've also got to talk about making sure that the structures and systems and institutions that we are invested in, things like those resources, those wraparound services, have the robust investment from our cities, from our communities, from our governments, because you get where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. So we've got to be putting our resources into the things that we want to grow and to develop, and not just pouring more and more money into carceral systems that really don't protect our people or make our communities safe. And that conversation is a heart conversation as well as a head conversation. There's an old saying that says, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. So if you are showing up in community, in places where people are being impacted, you need to be prepared to listen more than you speak. You might think you have a lot of solutions, but if you are not listening to what the people are saying they need, you really are not attuned to the needs of the communities that you're trying to minister to, or provide resources for, or provide support for. So it's important to listen. And so the People's Coalition for Safety and Freedom is giving us the tools that we need in order to be able to effectively listen to the needs of community members, amplify those stories, amplify those issues, and really get to the heart of what is causing this rift and causing this feeling of overwhelm and the feelings of frustration that cause people to disconnect and not care, and also allowing them to be able to kind of heal from the harms that have been happening to them, and to make them feel seen, heard, and valued in a community and in a society that is often telling them the message that they are the problem rather than people who are facing problems.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that, Timothy. I want to give us a flag that we're coming close to our time. And I want to also make sure that Dana, you have an opportunity to talk about the fact that we're partnering on a panel at the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation Conference next week. We are pulling up. I say, you know, we're taking it all the way to DC, okay, next week. So I also want to make sure that you have the opportunity to highlight some of the ways that we are doing just exactly what Timothy just said, is helping to bring these issues to the decision makers, bring this education and this legislative process that the coalition is in the process of over these last 2 years. I want to say it's going on 3 years, right, with the coalition building and the rewriting process, how important it is that we now are, you know, we're trying to reverse engineer, right? Like they pushed our people out, they're trying to lock us out of the process. It's like, actually, we're about to flip it on them, right? And we're bringing all of the work, right, of the people's process to DC. And that process is kicking off this fall and into next year and election year and all that other good stuff.
Great. Thank you so much for that, Tia. So I am excited about the panel, and I'm excited because we also have Congresswoman Sydney Kalmager-Dove, who will be who will be a panelist on it. She has been, when she was in the state of California, she had been a leader in this space, and already she's only been in Congress for less than 9 to 10 months, and already she has been a leader in this particular space as well. So we will be hearing from her perspective as well as others on the panel. But I just want to share a few things.
That's Kendrick, Congressperson, the co-host.
What did you say?
She said that's my congressperson.
Oh, okay, she's great. I love her. I actually screamed out loud when she finally confirmed. So the other thing I just want to share are just ways in which you can get involved. I highly suggest you all follow.
Hold on. Your sound went out for some reason.
Can you hear me?
Dana, can you hear us? We stopped being able to hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, yes, here we
Okay.
go. Listen, Richard's not gonna get us. What you call Richard? Richard's not gonna get us today.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that. I don't know what happened. I'll just say a few things and ways that individuals can get involved. Um, Follow Build Power, follow People's Coalition on Instagram. And the reason why I say this is because you're going to see, start to see, especially next year, some call to actions. And they're going to be strategic. And I just want to explain how they're strategic so people know why it's important for you to get involved. We're going to be thinking about how do we engage Congress in 3 ways. We're going to be thinking about how do we engage Congress in the appropriations process, which means how Congress funds the federal government. So as we hear conversations around shutdown, things like that, that's Congress trying to fund the federal government. And a lot of that funding goes to a lot of these policing programs or supporting the carceral state. And so we are going to be finding ways to engage and have conversations around funding on the Hill. The second thing is we're also going to be looking at legislation that is moving right now. Not a lot of legislation is moving, but for example, the Farm Bill is moving. And in the Farm Bill, the question is, should SNAP, formerly known as food stamps, eligibility be granted to formerly incarcerated individuals? In our community, yes. And so being at the table, having those conversations around that will be very important. So we're identifying bills that are moving where we can make more immediate impact in our communities. And then lastly, I will say that we also want to make sure that we are having clear conversations with key members. So we are heavily targeting here. We're targeting people on committees. These are the members of Congress who are experts in these issue areas and who have the levers to make change. We are going to be working directly with them and having conversations about the People's Bill. And so from that, we're going to learn about specific actions we should take. A member's office will say, we need help with X, and we're going to put it out to the community, and we would love for you to respond to that so that we can make movement on that. So those are 3 ways that you can get involved. Or three reasons why we're asking you to get involved. And then lastly, I'll just say, if you know of an organization that's doing great work in your state that you think should be a part of the coalition, please reach out to the People's Coalition, reach out to Build Power, because we are also trying to expand our coalition and our reach throughout the United States.
Come on. Now, I just want to show y'all that when people talking about we ain't doing the work, that we only limited in our scope of thinking, that we only want to defund, we only want to, most of their work is trying to find money, resources, and infrastructure for the things that our people need. Just the basic things that they need to survive and do well and be healthy. And the part that is so frustrating is that we have to focus first on well, I wouldn't even say first. At the same time, we're focusing on the most traumatizing work of repealing and replacing this 94 crime bill that was so pervasive that we all have people that we know, Black folks especially, Black and brown folks, queer folks, know somebody, multiple people who have been touched by this in the most traumatic ways, and it has upended some of their lives. So many of their lives. So there is no work more important than this. There's no work more important than this. And there are so many people around the country who are having this, who have this consideration, who have this strategy, very specific strategy. They have been, in the trenches, brainstorming, building relationships, having challenging conversations, and working out all the kinks of the things that y'all think that we not considering in this movement. We've considered them for decades, and have passed the work down, trained people. It is an organized movement, all right? So get involved. We need more and more people. We need more and more bodies. All these people who are supporting the SAG strike, and the writers strike, the people that are supporting UPS workers, hotel workers, everybody around us. There's no more important work than this, and we need to make sure that we get involved and support these people who are in the trenches and being attacked now. We're going to have this panel next week, but how can we get involved before then and after then?
Absolutely. So very briefly, I will say, make sure that you follow the work of the People's Coalition for Safety and Freedom. Plug into organizations in your local context like Free Hearts for Tennessee, the Free the Vote Coalition, and other groups that are doing this work both of dismantling and reconstructing systems that are actually going to be allow for thriving for our communities. And I'll go ahead and end my remarks. I know we're getting close with the words of Assata Shakur, which I think is so appropriate in this moment with 29 years beyond the crime bill and its impacts. But it's so important that we remember what allows us to be able to have the energy and the strength and the history of connection that brings us to this work and to this moment. And so it is our duty to fight for our freedom. It is our duty to win. And we must love and support one another, for we have nothing to lose but our chains.
I say, I say, where is that bucket when you need it? Somebody need to pass this thing around, get us some money for the
And with that,
okay?
I will sit myself down in my folding chair and say, Montgomery Bell.
Hallelujah!
And now, folded chair, Dana.
Dana, you want to give us the last word?
We see your lips, sister. We don't hear you sound.
Can you hear me now?
There we go.
I tried to go on mute so I wouldn't bother you, Tim. I don't know how to follow that, so I'm just going to give just some direct advice because I don't know how to follow that. You should have had me go first. So I'll just say this: we, the coalition, build power. We are doing the governing work to hold members accountable. Okay, it's hard work, but we're doing it. Election is coming up, 2024. And to me, voting is not the only thing you do, it's the floor of where we start. But we're doing that accountability work for you all as well. And we want you to be engaged. My advice to you all is everyone keeps focusing on the executive branch, Joe Biden, which I think is key and important. But Congress has the authority to repeal and replace the crime bill, which means your senators and representatives that are running for election need to be asked the questions about what they're doing in that space constantly. The pressure needs to be applied. So I encourage you all, when you have the opportunity, when you see a member running for office, to start asking those questions. Because the more folks we vote in who think like us, or who are open to hearing reform type conversations or are open to transformation, the easier this work becomes. So I'm just saying to you all, again, I understand where Joe Biden was in 1994, but he does not have the full authority, Congress does, to repeal and replace the crime bill. So you need to be very conscious of who you're electing to office, but you also need to make sure you're showing up in these conversations when they're speaking about these issues.
Come on and say, you said, I'm just going to say, and then I'm just going to say, I don't know, I can't follow that. I'm just going to, but what you should do is, and this is what we got. Okay, I got you. I see how
And
you
drop the mic, right?
Yeah,
And drop the mic.
I see how you work. I think that is super important. I think it's more important than anything to understand the framing of right now is that the election is coming up. Any of these fights trying to divide up Black women with trans rights and trying to divide up the most important voting blocks with, talks about safety when they have not invested anything in our safety and intentionally taking money away from it and thwarted the efforts in the past couple of years that were historic, that we're supposed to support our communities, okay? So the things that are happening right now are not accidental. They are trying to divide us because they know how powerful we are. So more than anything, we need to get involved in coalitions like this that give us a home, that give us a place to come back and reground ourselves when they have us thinking that we're crazy and that, you know, what we're asking for is too much, that Congress doesn't have the power to do things, and throwing it back at at Joe Biden, and Joe Biden throwing it back to Congress. And and Lord knows the whole Republican Party is hell, just demons and devils. Like, what is going on? So we don't want none of that. You know what I'm saying? I'm just saying, these politicians are acting a fool, and they're gonna tell you this next year that they can't do nothing. And we just talked about right here how they can. And this is the coalition that is pushing that work forward and holding those folks accountable. And we're going to be right there with them. All right. So Tia, how you want to close this out?
How I'll close this out is saying that Build Power Incorporated is a 501c3 nonprofit organization. We're also nonpartisan.
That's why I said both of them.
Individuals on this panel have expressed their own personal political perspectives, and we have given them the opportunity to share this platform about their work because they are important leaders and important perspectives to have shared. Our mission at Build Power is to reimagine and realize the liberated future our people deserve. And what I noticed throughout the chat, you know, I'm the moderator, right? So I'm monitoring the chat. I'm seeing if people have questions. I'm seeing how people are reacting and responding. And for both of you, Dana and Timothy, first, let's just give it up for Dana and Timothy for being on with us today and just, you know, the study hall, okay, 2022 summer school, just reminding us of all of the things and bringing it home as we get ready to go to DC next week, is that the thing that people resonate the most, both when we're talking about the impact that it's had on our communities, but also when we're talking about the vision of what we're fighting for. When we're talking about giving people a voice in Congress, when you're talking about the ways that schools need wraparound services and how people deserve, you know, food stamps, right? Security, those are that resonate the most in the chat and is getting the most hearts, because we know what we need. And when we look around at the circumstances that we're dealing with, you know, Kendrick, you talked about the rhetoric and also like the very real conditions that folks are dealing with the rise in street crime and income disparities and houselessness, and how that is having our folks cry out for solutions very similar to the situation 29 years ago and the circumstances that and when the crime bill was passed. We have an opportunity to get it right. Our generation has an opportunity to turn the corner and steer us towards a future that actually creates thriving, safety, vibrant opportunities for all of us and all of our lives. And that's what this work is about. We're so happy to be able to partner with the People's Coalition to uplift y'all. We're looking forward to the panel partnering with Representative Kamlager to make sure that we have the hit the ground running right at the top of the legislative sessions in order to advance this really important work. So I just want to say thank you again. Thank you to Kendrick, our host with the most, keeping the conversation thriving and going, helping to share that analysis. Thank you again to Dana and Timothy. Thank you to the audience. We will definitely save the live. I know everybody was coming in like, I was late. It's all right. Save the video. It will be on our profiles at Build Power and at People's Coalition for you to see again. And we will have a lot more for y'all in the next weeks and months. And of course, okay, good old 2024. Oh, also every year is an election year. Look, there's
local elections right now, Nashville elections tomorrow. Make sure you go out and vote, Nashville. Represent at the polls. We need y'all to turn up.
And can I say really quickly, thank you, Tia. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I just want to make sure you're recognized as well.
Thank you, sister.
You're welcome. You're welcome. All right, y'all. Thank you so much. Have a great rest of your day. You have your marching orders. And if you don't remember, we'll have a little recap for you. We will hopefully see you next week and be able to live stream the panel as well. Peace, y'all.